Hello and welcome to Mad Men Sports. Today, we are honored to have Ryan Talbot from NYup.com joining the show via Zoom in order to talk about everything from free agency, Stefon Diggs, the draft, and even the division outlook. Thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoy it. Take care, stay safe, and have a great day.
So far, I mean, we're like 2 to 3 weeks into the Bills offseason. How would you grade it so far?
I'm going to say maybe an A minus, just because they focus so much on defense. I thought there would be a few more offensive additions than there have been. Obviously, the big addition is Stefon Diggs, and that's an A plus. That's a home run. That's a great addition to this offense. They obviously re-signed Quentin Spain. They brought back Isaiah McKenzie. I like the Darrell Williams signing. He played 4 different positions on the O-line, although he's better on the right side than anything else. But I like that. But I thought maybe there'd be a compliment at running back. Maybe there'd be another wide receiver brought in to kind of compete for a bottom roster spot. I still think that will be the case. I think they're kind of waiting it out, waiting for a player to kind of meet their price range of what they want to pay, vet minimum most likely. So, but most of the additions have come on defense where they've been really solid. And it's not like they're spending that money frivolously. They lost Jack Lawson. They lost Jordan Phillips. Lorenzo Alexander retired. So they replaced all those players that needed to be done. They've brought in competition for cornerback too. That needed to be done. I have some questions still about those cornerbacks that are competing for that second spot, but that's the beauty of this summer, this training camp, whenever we get to that. So we'll kind of wait and see on that.
Yeah, that's kind of like a side story going on. Like, I guess the NFL's the side story at the moment in reality, but is it plausible to think that the season does start on time? I mean, I know it's kind of out there right now and you haven't really kicked the tires on it too much in ideas. It's a very long-term idea. But
Yeah, I still think it's on the table that they want that right now they're going to start on time. There's some big call going on, or that started at noon today, so maybe they're talking to all sports about that in terms of we can't play sports again until this time, and maybe it'll adjust. Right now, I think their plan is to start on time, but it wouldn't shock me one bit if they're pushed back by a few months, which would be very interesting because all of a sudden, what's it going to be like if you're playing football at New Era Field in February and March and things like that? It's going to be a lot different if that is the case.
yeah, and for the Bills especially, that's such an interesting storyline because it's cold in December, but it's a different kind of cold in February and January. And this is supposed to be the year where the Bills are, kind of taking over the AFC East. And, Brady's gone. They get Diggs. It's the third year for Allen. It would be a real, no Bills fan wants to see it like passed up on the opportunity to kind of take over and show what they're worth. So there's a lot going on right now, but if you're trying to focus, on the small things, it'll help you distract you from the possibilities of the big things. So there's just so much. So, big things, small things. One of the moves that was made by the Bills that kind of went under the radar that, this guy signed a 3-year deal. It's kind of a bigger deal than we're probably thinking of right now, at least on the surface. This AJ Klein move by the Bills, they signed him for a 3-year deal. And I can only assume that he's pegged in as the starter for that linebacker spot that Lorenzo held down for the first 2 snaps of the drive, So what do you think about the AJ Klein move? Do you think that was a good move? Do you think we're going to be surprised by, this under the radar kind of type of linebacker coming in?
Yeah, I think it was a solid signing. I think a lot of people thought that he was going to come to Buffalo before he signed with the Saints after he left the Panthers originally. I think a lot of people kind of pegged the Bills as a target for him at that point in time, and obviously it didn't happen there. But he brings versatility. He played inside and outside with New Orleans. Obviously here he's going to be playing that Lorenzo Alexander role. But if something were to happen to Tremaine Edmonds, which obviously you hope nothing like that would happen because he's such a big key part to that defense, he could slide into that inside linebacker spot. He has experience playing in that role, backing up Luke Kuechly in Carolina, and obviously playing inside in New Orleans as well. So he has versatility there. He can contribute on special teams. Maybe didn't play as much on special teams in the last few years in New Orleans as he did in Carolina, but he can contribute there. he's solid in coverage. He's not a great coverage linebacker like Milano. He doesn't have the athleticism of Edmonds, but he's solid. He's a guy that probably has more athleticism at this point in his career than what we saw from Lorenzo Alexander in his final season or two, which Alexander, though, did come up big at times in those last few years despite his age. But, you're not going to see him a lot on defense. This is a team that ran out of the nickel like 75% of the time last year. So they had 2 linebackers on the field. So like you said, it's going to be those first 2 downs, and it's going to be dependent on the game plan, who they're playing on a week-to-week basis. So I think it's a solid addition. And like you said, it probably is flying under the radar when you look at the Mario Addisons, the Stefon Diggs, the bigger names. Even Josh Norman's a bigger name per se. And some of these other guys that they've brought in this offseason.
Which, if we're going to let a potential starter fly under the radar, you could probably say we had a pretty good offseason so far. And, it's nice to have, Bills fans and Bills, the whole organization in general has done such a 180 of what they were even 10 years ago. It's just an insane, evolution to this franchise to, there's no Brady, and now they're in the perfect position to take over the division. And, I know you guys, he had a conference call with Bean a little bit ago this week, and then he said that they're still the top dog. Do you think that that's legitimate, that they probably still should be feared in the AFC East, even though there is no Tom Brady?
I actually do for this point in time. Now, we'll wait and see. I actually think Jarrett Stidham has a pretty solid shot to be their opening day starter. I think they really do like him. If you bring in, though, a Cam Newton, or if obviously they'd have to maneuver some cap around, though, because they're not in a good situation there. But if they were to bring in someone like that, then you'd take them even more seriously. But as long as they have Bill Belichick, I'm not going to write them off. He's a great coach. They lost some names on defense, but they still have a really good defense. And I think that he'll go back to an old school game plan and say, okay, we don't have Tom Brady anymore. We're going to grind these games out. We're going to run the ball. We're going to focus on running the ball against teams, low scoring games where we can kind of shut people down on defense, and it won't be pretty, but they're going to be able to compete. You've seen, that defense, what they did to Josh Allen in that first matchup last year. They absolutely shut down Sam Darnold both games last season, made Darnold look really bad. So there's still young quarterbacks in this division. There might be a third one added by the Dolphins in the draft. Whether or not they start them this year or not is to be seen. So there's still a lot that's up in the air, and I just can't write off a Bill Belichick team at this point in time.
Absolutely. And I know that this came out from I believe it was the Rich Eisen show with the Emmanuel Sanders thing earlier this week. So he was talking with the Bills on that before the Diggs trade. Do you think Bean was kind of leveraging him as like a backup plan if this Diggs thing didn't go through? Or do you think he was talking to Sanders, and then all of a sudden this Diggs things came on the table and he was like, I got to jump on this?
Maybe a mix of both, to be honest. Here's how I look at it. They call the Vikings midday. Vikings are kind of standoffish about it. They don't say 100% no, but they kind of say he's our number one wide receiver. We're not shopping him. It would have to take a lot. And they kind of left it at that. So at that point in time, Bean said we're talking to free agents. I'm sure they've been talking to Sanders and his reps for some time. I'm sure it wasn't just out of the blue if Sanders especially was saying, let me sleep on it and let me make a decision. So you'd think there was some back and forth there already. So I think that Sanders was their prime target in free agency. But after that first call with the Vikings, I think the Bills got off the phone and said, listen, I think that this guy is actually available, whether or not the Vikings are saying it or not. We're going to circle back later that night, see what can get done. And if it can get done, he is top priority. He's number one priority. And once they pull that off, I'm guessing all communication with Sanders and his reps kind of stopped at that point in time.
Which is, a good development to have, because if their backup plan is a guy that's 33 years old on the market, and you're able to turn it around and get the 26-year-old with a 4-year deal, I mean, it's a perfect breakout. I know Jake, this is Jake, of course, he loves the Diggs deal. And if it came down to Diggs or Sanders, I mean, he's taking Diggs every day. Wouldn't you agree, Jake?
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, Stefon Diggs has been certainly an integral part of the Vikings offense. I mean, Sanders, he's been kind of moving around in this league. It would have been nice. I mean, trust me, I would love to have Sanders on the Bills as well, but I'm definitely glad Stefon Diggs is a Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, and with the draft coming up, Ryan, do you think that they'll still angle for a wide receiver? I know that, they kind of have these guys kind of penciled in here. They brought back McKenzie, they brought back Foster, they still have Duke Williams. It's kind of getting a crowded room with Roberts. We still have Beasley, Brown. This list is starting to go on and on. Do you think they'll still go after? I know Bills fans love Chase Claypool, and I like Michael Pittman, but now that the roster's kind of settled in a little bit, do we have space for another wide receiver to come in here with drafting capital?
That's a great question. They were interested in Rashard Higgins at one point too, and I think they still are. I think he's the guy that they're waiting to see. Will his price tag come down to that vet minimum? Will he come for a year to kind of prove himself? I think at this point in time, you still have to take a wide receiver. And I'm not saying round 2, round 3 by any means, but I'm saying at the start of day 3 and one of those first 2 picks, I would still be taking a wide receiver with one of those picks, because this year's draft is so loaded that guys that would go on day 2 are going to be falling to day 3, some of those players. Now, a guy like Claypool, a guy like Pittman, I think they fall in that 2-3 range. They're not going to be there on day 3. But there's Brian Edwards, a guy like that, who I think would be getting hyped up a lot more if he didn't suffer an injury before the combine and things like that. There's some other players out there. Hamler, I think he might be a day 2 guy too. And I'm blanking. A big wide receiver, played at Georgia last year. It'll come to Cager, I want to say. They've shown some interest in him. He's more of a day 3 guy. Played pretty fast there. I could see him being a late addition. I don't think it's a priority anymore. I would be somewhat surprised if in round 2 they went wide receiver, unless some big name like a Denzel Mims fell to them, which I don't envision happening. But unless something like that happens, I think you're looking at possibly running back, which might upset some people. I think that they like Singletary, they like Yeldon, but I think they look at Yeldon as more of a running back 3. We want to bring in someone else that can kind of compete for that complement with Singletary. And if you're not going there, there's a lot of high upside offensive tackles where you don't have to get them onto the field this year. If you're Buffalo, maybe you take a shot there. And then defense. Cornerback is still in play, in my opinion, despite all the moves. Looking at some of the other deals that cornerbacks have signed since the start of free agency, I'm not a big fan of the Josh Norman deal. It's going to end up being about $6 million for him to come in, where a guy like Kevin Johnson, who was solid, and I know he has injury history, he was only 3.5. But they're banking on Norman being the guy that at least fits their defense a lot better than he did in Washington. Gaines is as talented as they come. The guy just cannot stay healthy, and I feel for him. 2 concussions in 3 years with the Browns, hamstring, and I want to say groin injuries in his first stint with Buffalo. Last year, it was a lower body injury in training camp that put him out. Liz Frank injury with the Rams that had him lose an entire season. So this guy is very talented. The Bills were 8-3 with him on the field in 2017, and it was partly because he and rookie Trey White were such a good combination. But you have questions there. Levi Wallace was picked on last year. I want to say he bounced back pretty well at the end of the season. I thought he had his best game against the Steelers on that Sunday night game. He actually capped up the game with an interception. It was only a few snaps in the Jets game in Week 17, and he got injured, but he had another interception there. He was I thought his confidence was kind of rebuilding at that point. But there's a lot of ebbs and flows with his game. So I still have question marks there. If you can get Stefon Diggs' brother, Trayvon, in round 2, I would do that in a heartbeat. It's not just because he's Stefon's brother. He's a talented cornerback that fits the zone scheme. Round 3, there's some guys that I really like there. Troy Pride Jr. out of Notre Dame. He fits the zone scheme. And there's others as well. But I think cornerback's on the board. And I wouldn't be shocked if they also go safety. I know that they just re-signed Poyer, but it's only a short-term deal. It's kind of just give them more money. You have Hyde for a few more seasons. I think they like Jaquan Johnson. Saran Neal is your big nickel right now. But they actually promoted a coach to big nickel coach in this offseason. So I think that's going to be a big part of their defense. So a Kyle Duggar in round 2 makes sense. A Jeremy Chin makes sense if he's there. So those are some players that I could anticipate them going with here on day 2 of the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to not have a direct need. And, when you look at it, the direct need probably was wide receiver, and they took care of that with probably the best option available with what they could have done with this 22nd pick there. Now, this is kind of a curveball, and I don't know if it's talked about or not, but, Brian Dable is the offensive coordinator. We all know that, but he had a connection to Alabama with Jalen Hurts. Now, is there possible on day 3, if he's still there, could we maybe see him bring him in for maybe a quarterback 2 competition a little bit, and kind of a safety valve for Josh Allen?
Early on in the draft process, the thought crossed my mind. Talented, raw, a lot of the same skills that you kind of see as Josh Allen, not completely the same by any means, but there's enough of an overlap there where if Allen were to go down, you wouldn't have to adjust your game plan significantly in terms of what you'd like to do. But I think Hurts right now, I think he's kind of skyrocketed in terms of his draft stock. And I would be really surprised if he didn't go on day 2 at this point in time. I could end up being wrong there, but I think there's some teams that kind of look at him and say, he answered a lot of questions at the Senior Bowl. He answered a lot of questions this offseason with interviews, things like that. He's apparently impressed a lot of personnel based on what you've read, based on what I've seen. And I wouldn't be shocked if he's off the board in round 2 to a team that maybe has a guy there that's getting up in age and they want to develop someone within the next year or 2.
Absolutely. And I mean, if he's even there in day 2, I wouldn't even really put it past the Bills to maybe jump up and maybe take a swing at him in the 3rd round, like they kind of did with Singletary and Knox. That they're not opposed by any means by jumping back into the 3rd round or 2nd round and kind of taking in there. So I mean, this is an exciting time. While there's also some craziness going on in the world, the Bills themselves, if the microcosm of the Bills, they are in such a different situation than they found themselves in the last decade, 2 decades, and a lot of the credit has to be attributed to Bean and McDermott for actually building the culture that everyone's kind of poked fun at over the years. But it's it worked. If it didn't work, everyone would still be laughing at it. But now it's not so much culture boy. He's talking about not getting choir boys in here. He wants a little bit of attitude. We know that Jefferson's had his battles with some fans in the stands. So now they're kind of putting the final touches on their team, and it's nice to see it all happen. It's exciting times.
Yeah, I think Bills fans have every reason to be excited right now. And you're right. When they first came aboard and they're like, culture process over and over. And then early in the preseason, within a matter of hours, they get rid of Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby. And I mean, back, boom, right after each other. I thought someone actually hacked their texting service when that happened. I still remember getting those team texts. And I'm like, there's no way. They're getting rid of their number 1 guy at corner and their number 1 wide receiver. And they did it. And they got a lot of backlash for that. And, this team's going to tank. This team's doing this and that. And they, backing into the playoffs, mind you. But they still made the playoffs. They're still competitive. They got rid of guys that they kind of felt maybe weren't buying in. But at the same time, they were starting to replenish their draft picks. They're starting to, build this up. And that's something that we've seen Brendan Bean do almost every single year. And he talked about that on his conference call. He said, I haven't been able to get comp picks yet from this position as Bills GM, but what he does do every year is around that August time, he'll trade away a Wyatt Teller and get a 5th and a 6th round pick. He'll trade away a Russell Bodine. I have no idea how he was able to get a pick for Russell Bodine from the Patriots, but he did it. And Bodine didn't even last a week there, and and they still kept the pick. Sometimes those trades are they're dependent on a player making a team, but this one wasn't. So that kind of just shows you how savvy he is. And sure enough, the Bodine pick, one of the Teller picks is what they used to go up and get Stefon Diggs. So they still have their own 5th. They still have their own 6th. They added a 7th. They got rid of a 4th next year, but they had those picks to send away with their 1st round pick this year because Bean does this. He adds these draft picks in, and then he either uses them to move up in the draft to get guys that he likes, or in this case, he was able to go out and get a legitimate number 1 wide receiver.
Yeah, he's done a great job. And he's always, whether it's trading back up in this, mid rounds, he's landed on his 5th round picks like Milano and Taron Johnson. He's traded away his 1st round pick. He's done it all. And at this point, we can do nothing but just trust him, trust the process, I guess, and then kind of just move forward. And, this is what the Bills are. They are in a position to take over the AFC East and at least be in competitive. They've been in one possession games with the Patriots. They've built their team up. Allen needs to take a step forward. The offense needs to take a step forward, couple steps forward probably. And then the defense needs to just stay status quo. And then this team, we're looking at a solid perennial playoff team. They've made it to the last 3 years, and I don't see – they're just throwing teams in the playoffs now. And I just see that the fact that they're probably just, they've got to continue making it. And the Jets seem farther away than they probably are. They didn't seem like they did too much this offseason. Would you agree?
I agree completely with that. Let's start with the division. Patriots, we've already addressed. They lost Tom Brady. They lost some big defensive names that have at least played very well for them in the last few seasons. But again, the Belichick factor is there. The defense is still solid. So I think that they're still going to be in that race with the AFC East in a wild card spot. The Jets, I'm not really quite sure what they're doing. I get that Joe Douglas can only do so much. But I thought that the offensive line additions were pretty underwhelming. And you only have so much money you can spend, but spending $30 million on a George Fant, a guy that was more of a converted tight end and has a lot of in the tape, he whiffs a lot on plays. He misses his assignments. I wasn't impressed where you could get a Brian Balaga for the same amount of money, or maybe they would have had to overpay a little bit for him just for him to come to that team. But if you're spending the same amount of money, I want the proven guy that can actually step in and help your quarterback that's still on his rookie deal. They added some solid guys around the line, and maybe they end up getting a few pleasant surprises, kind of like the Bills did last year with John Feliciano. But I wasn't too overwhelmed with what they've done. They lost Robbie Anderson, and Anderson has his own issues off the field, so I can get why maybe they weren't maybe why they were hesitant to give him any kind of big money. But Rashad Perriman, he came on late last year when both the Tampa Bay's wide receivers were out. But it's not a number one wide receiver by any means. You're not giving Sam Darnold what he needs there. In terms of Miami, a lot of big name additions, a lot of money spent there. Good for Shaq Lawson getting $10 million a year on average from them. I like that team. I still think they're at least a year away from competing consistently. Throwing money around doesn't necessarily pay off in free agency, and they've thrown a lot of money around. I think they've improved their team. I really like what they did last year in terms of building up the culture, because everyone was talking about that team losing out pretty much all season, and they won some impressive games, and it was with a lack of talent. But the coaching there is solid with Flores. I think he has them in the right direction. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens at quarterback. Ryan Fitzpatrick is 1 year fill-in still at this point in his career. But everyone's banking on them getting Tua. And they're still at 5 right now. I know they have the draft picks to move up to, but what's to say another team doesn't jump in front of them at 2 or 3 or 4 and end up getting Tua? And then all of a sudden, and Herbert, are they going to go another position altogether and then kind of address that in the next round as well? So it's going to be interesting nonetheless to see what they do.
Yeah, the whole division itself is on the cusp of just shifting to the Dolphins being young, up and coming, kind of what the Bills were last year. I think they're very close to following in the similar footsteps of, Flores does preach culture, and they did bring in a lot of big name guys, which I don't think something the Bills would have done, like the Byron Jones and the Shaq Lawson. They paid a little bit, they paid for him, and even Shaq himself said it was an offer he couldn't refuse because he probably wasn't getting it anywhere else. So, they started to spend. They have the draft capital. It's weird that people are thinking that a team that was so far down in Miami is now like the second up and coming team, and it's kind of passing the Jets by because it seems like you got the draft capital. They did a full reset on their team, and they're looking pretty impressive moving forward as long as they hit on even half their picks. So the division will be interesting, and I'm excited to see it kind of grow, and hopefully the Bills have enough of an edge on everyone that they can keep growing and kind of keep their distance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you nailed it, though. Miami has to hit on those draft picks. We've seen the Browns do this a few times where they've had this stockpile of picks from trades where they've moved up, moved down. and then they whiff on the majority of the picks, and then all of a sudden you're in the same boat that you were in before. So getting the picks is great, but if you don't hit on them, then you're in the same boat that you were going to be in the year before, and find those key pieces in this year's draft. I mean, look at the Raiders last year. They had 3 first-round picks. Farrell was their first. That kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. That helped Ed Oliver fall into Buffalo's lap. He had an uneven rookie year. He had some moments, but I wouldn't say it was a hit yet or a miss, but far from a hit. Then they added a safety, I believe, that didn't do as much as I think they were anticipating. They hit on Josh Jacobs. I'll give them that. Josh Jacobs is a very talented back. But 3 picks, and right now the only one that really proved himself was the running back, which, as great as Jacobs is, you can find solid backs in those middle rounds. So who knows if the Raiders 2-3 years from now are going to look back on that and say, oh, we really missed some opportunities there.
Yeah, I hate to always write off running backs, but I always call them a dime a dozen because, I mean, think about like the year Mike Gillislee had or Carlos Williams. The Bills have had just so many running backs just cycle on through here, and then, they go after C.J. Spillers and first rounders, and then that's probably what set their franchise back throughout the decade was just constantly gunning for first round running backs when you don't necessarily need them. And, besides maybe the sure thing of getting Josh Jacobs, the Raiders haven't really done much, and now they're kind of scrambling. They hate their own quarterback, and now what do you got to show for everything? So, Ryan, I don't want to take up too much of your time on this mediocre Saturday because you can't really go outside anyways. But I appreciate you coming on talking to us, and we really hope that we can get you on again. I mean, this was wonderful.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, guys. Anytime.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.